Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about the menstrual cycle and understanding all the different phases that are actually involved with it. Because coming from experience, not many women actually understand their menstrual cycle and how this plays such an important role on our mental and our physical health. So I'm here with Nikiita Jackson. So she is a naturopath and she has a very keen interest and passion for women's health, and in particular women's hormones and the menstrual cycle. So do you want to give us a little bit of an understanding of how you understand your menstrual cycle?
Yes, I'd love to. So this is definitely one of my favourite topics to talk about because this is literally, how I live my life, and I can't imagine not living my life in this way. So when it comes to the normal natural menstrual cycle, what I mean by that is when someone's not on any hormonal contraception, or if someone hasn't gone through menopause, they just have, the normal natural cycle without all those influences, then what we can do is we can actually break it up into 4 different phases to have a really good understanding of how it works. Because when it comes to our menstrual cycle, our hormones are constantly fluctuating throughout it. We are not the same person hormonally that we were the day before. Our hormones are fluctuating that rapidly and that quickly. So we really, to get a really good understanding of how these hormonal fluctuations sort of affect us, we can actually break it up into a few different phases and sort of look at those phases to see the way that, our energy requirements change, or our maybe our social abilities change or whatnot, because it all changes throughout the cycle. So the way I like to sort of split it up, and the way many sort of professionals in this area like to split it up, is in 4 different phases. Firstly, we have our menstrual phase. Then we have our menstrual phase is when we're bleeding, so it's from day 1 of our period till when we stop bleeding. Then we have our follicular phase, which is from the day after we stop bleeding all the way up until ovulation. Then we have our ovulation phase, which is usually around the middle of our cycle. This is when we're ovulating, so when the egg gets released to go down to the fallopian tube. This is when we're fertile. This usually goes for around 5 days during the middle of our cycle. And then lastly, we have our luteal phase, which goes from after ovulation back until we get our period again. So they're the 4 different phases. We have our menstruation phase, follicular phase, ovulation phase, and luteal phase. Now, the reason we split it up into these 4 phases is because when we do this, we can actually compare this to the seasons of the earth. So it'll make more sense in a second, but in this sort of analogy, our menstrual phase can be compared to the season of winter. Our follicular phase can be compared to the season of spring. Our ovulation phase can be compared to the season of summer, and our luteal phase can be compared to the season of autumn. And that's because these phases actually affect our energy requirements and our mood and a lot of the ways that we feel in the same way that these seasons usually would.
So they're quite correlated.
Yeah, they correlate really beautifully.
They make it easier to remember.
Yeah, and it makes it easier to remember. You don't have to remember all those weird names like follicular and luteal. So to make this make more sense, we'll focus on the menstrual phase first, because I really feel like this is a really good representation of how this analogy works. So when we're in our menstruation phase, when we're on our period, our hormones are at their absolute lowest. Our estrogen and progesterone are basically flatlining, and this actually is what signals to our body to actually bleed. So during this phase, because our hormones are lowest, our energy is also lowest as well, because our hormones actually contribute to our energy. So during this phase, we also feel low energy because we're going through quite a demanding process of our body. Like, to actually have a period is not just an easy process that takes no energy. It actually uses a lot of our nutrients and our energy in our body, so we're naturally going to be feeling more depleted than we would during the other times of our cycle. So this is why we can compare this phase to winter, because in winter many of us also feel similar to this. Our energy is a little bit lower, we're feeling a little bit more tired, maybe feeling a little bit more to ourselves, like not as social. Same thing happens in the menstrual phase. Because our hormones are low, our estrogen, which is actually responsible for so many things in the body, but one of the things it's responsible is actually our social skills. Estrogen actually causes us to become more social. But if it's while it's low during the menstrual phase, we actually don't feel as social, sort of like we would in winter. So as well as being tired, we're actually feeling less likely to be socializing with other people. And also we're less able to recover and regenerate than we would be in other phases of our cycle. So this is why this phase is a really good time to actually not push too hard when it comes to exercise, because we're actually not able to recover and rest. Not rest, but recover the same way we would be throughout the other phases. So during this phase, we really want to make sure we're actually not pushing ourselves too hard. Really, I would recommend sticking to low intensity exercises like walking and yoga and Pilates. Especially in day 1 and 2 of the cycle, I would usually tell women to just avoid heavy lifting altogether, because I find when women do push themselves during this part of the cycle, they actually feel more depleted throughout their whole cycle, because they really weren't respecting that phase for what it is, and they're actually depleting all their energy reserves way too early on. So yeah, when it comes to exercise, it's really, like, if there's one takeaway message from this whole video, I would say respect your menstrual phase, really listen to your body, don't push yourself too hard, and don't beat yourself up if you're not living up to your standards during this phase of your cycle, because your body simply isn't meant to be performing at its highest rate.
It's a good time to be reserved, to be recovering, to be within yourself, doing more gentle exercises. Yeah,
100%. And in saying that, it's also a really good time for just being with yourself, resting, hibernating like you would in winter, and letting go of old things as well, like sort of letting go of the last cycle, letting go of anything that may have happened in the last few weeks, because as our body is literally letting go, it's also good to mentally and emotionally let go as well.
Awesome. That's good, because I think it's one area is women don't understand their own period, their own menstrual cycle, and that's the first phase of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, I hope that makes a bit more sense when it comes to the seasons and the phases.
I think it does.
Yeah, cool.
Moving on from that, what's our next phase?
Our next phase is our follicular phase. So once again, this is from after our period leading up to ovulation. And hormonally, this is when our hormones actually start to pick up again, particularly estrogen. Progesterone's still sort of quite low, but estrogen actually starts to pick up quite a bit leading up to ovulation. And this actually causes a spike in energy for us again. So we'll find a lot of women, not all the time, like sometimes you may have been sick this cycle or something might be going on. You may not always feel the way I'm describing, but a lot of women do. So during this phase, you'll find after your period's finished, you may find you have a little bit more energy again. You sort of feel a little bit more social because estrogen's starting to pick up. So estrogen is actually on a biological level telling your body to be more social again, because on a biological level it actually wants to find a partner and be able to breed during ovulation. So on a biological level you're being pushed to start making friends and start finding a partner again. So during this phase we might actually find that we become more actually extroverted and sort of externally focused rather than internally focused. We're actually more not worried, but more interested in how other people are perceiving us, how we're interacting with the outside world. We're probably more likely to say yes to social events. We're way better at public speaking. Like, there's been studies on it that women are the best at public speaking during this phase and also our ovulation phase, because estrogen is actually supporting our speech and our ability to speak. A woman will also look more youthful and actually more beautiful during this phase, because her estrogen is creating her to look more feminine and more attractive to be able to breed. So this is when you might be feeling, a little bit more, you might like the way you look more in the mirror. And then on an exercise level, this is a really good time to get back to the gym, because your energy is up there again, your hormones are supporting your recovery and also your strength. So it's a good time to, get back into lifting heavy weights or doing HIIT or cardio, all of those things.
The energy's picked back up again.
Yeah, it's much like spring. So relating it back to the analogy, you're in your spring phase, you're sort of like back into the world, like, hello, I'm here.
Flowers everywhere.
Yeah, I'm alive, hello, everyone's missed me, that's sort of how it feels. So
that's good.
Yeah.
Good understanding.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we move into the next phase.
So the next phase is our summer phase or our ovulation phase. So on a biological level, this is when, like I said before, our egg gets released to be fertilized. And on a biological level, our body is pushing us to reproduce. So in saying that, our bodies are definitely going to be more interested in reproducing. So you may find that your libido is higher during this time. You may find that you're feeling more sexy, more flirtatious, more willing to go out on dates. Your energy is usually still quite high during ovulation.
And we usually say this is PB week for a lot of women.
Yeah,
in the gym.
Like, I think they did studies and they said a woman's strength and recovery capabilities are significantly higher during this time, almost to a level where it's like superhuman how much stronger they are during this time. And that's because, as well as estrogen being high, they have a little like bump in testosterone as well, which actually supports all of these processes. So when it comes to if you're wanting to hit your PBs, or you're wanting to, you know, run that race or hit some sort of exercise goal, this is always the best time to do it if you can, because your hormones are heavily supporting that, and you will recover way better than you would in any other phase as well. So
definitely had that phase where we've had a day or a couple of days where you've just felt absolutely superhuman in the gym. You're like, whoa, where did that come from?
Literally.
It's usually ovulation.
Yeah, it is, and it's actually incredible. I always look forward to it so much.
It's coming up.
Yeah, I plan my whole life around it. So yeah, definitely a good time for exercising, good time for socializing, good time for going on dates, good time for saying yes to like maybe if you have important meetings or sort of collaborative exercises. It's a really good time for extroversion still, and you're going to find you're physically and emotionally still more extroverted. Yeah.
Cool. That's good to know. And then we're moving to the last phase.
Yeah, so the last phase is our luteal phase, and like I said, this is from after ovulation back until we get our period. And this is a longer phase usually, and can sort of be split in half, because on the first half of our luteal phase we're sort of riding the back of ovulation, so we still might feel a little bit like that, but then we're getting into our period again and our energy can start to slow down. So this is compared to the season of autumn, and it's sort of like the exhale of the cycle, or the exhale of the seasons. So this is when progesterone is actually highest, so our other hormone progesterone, and that actually creates a feeling of more internal, like looking inwards again. And that's because progesterone is the hormone that gets released in high amounts if we were to get pregnant. If we don't get pregnant, we still get a bit of progesterone during this time of our cycle. But basically what progesterone makes us feel like is if we were pregnant. So it sort of mimics our body to feel like we are carrying a baby, or we are getting ready for a baby to be in our life. So all of a sudden, instead of being focused externally on, you know, mating or finding a potential mate, all of a sudden we start to focus internally because we potentially are carrying a baby. So all of a sudden you may find that you're not so worried about extroversion anymore, and you're actually a little bit more homely or a bit more nesty. I always find during this time of my cycle, like I'm cleaning up the house, like trying to make things all nice, because on a biological level my body's like, oh, maybe there's a baby on the way. So it's a really good time for like cleaning and like wrapping up to-do lists,
decluttering your life.
It's a great time for decluttering. You may find that you care less about what people think. This is also a time that PMS can become a thing on a hormonal level. If your hormones are imbalanced, you may find yourself being irritable or angry or weepy. But on an energetical level, you're also just not as concerned with other people anymore, right? Because you're not interested in finding a mate. So all of a sudden you're like telling people to get lost because you don't really care about their opinion anymore. So that's how PMS can sort of manifest emotionally. When it comes to our energy requirements, at the beginning of our autumn phase or our luteal phase, we may find that we're still feeling, you know, relatively normal, can still hit the gym just as we were before. But then as we're sort of getting back into our menstrual phase, the last, say, 4 or 5 days of this luteal phase, our hormones are actually starting to drop again, which is going to signal us to get a period again. So we're actually going to find that we have like a decline in energy again. So we may find that it's better to go back to those slow movements leading back into our periods.
Or even if you're still training, just reducing your weights, like taking a bit of a deload.
Yeah, and not being hard on yourself if you're not hitting those high numbers that you were, because you're probably not going to be as productive or as strong. Yeah,
there's a flux every month.
Yeah.
That's fantastic to know about the menstrual cycle in more detail, and also how the seasons affect, and are a really good analogy for how that feels. Because I find the seasons are a much easier way to remember it than the real biological way.
Yeah.
But that's good. So this is a textbook cycle. Now, if somebody has hormonal imbalances, will their cycle look completely different?
Yeah, so depending what the hormonal imbalance is. So a normal menstrual cycle can be anywhere from 21 to 35 days. So if you're experiencing a cycle that's within that range, then yes, these seasons will affect you. Maybe you know, you might find that you have longer phases if you have a 35-day cycle, but you'll still go through all the phases if you are ovulating.
Yeah.
If you're not ovulating, then chances are that your cycle's could be all over the place, especially with women with polycystic ovarian syndrome, usually if a woman's not having regular cycles, she usually has polycystic ovarian syndrome or maybe something else, but it's usually that. And in that case, her cycle may be like 65 days long, 40 days long, all of these random numbers. In that case, they are still experiencing these seasons, but they're a lot more elongated and sometimes not as
just as regular.
You can't recognize the shifts as much. It's a little bit more blurred, if that makes sense. Yeah,
so generally we're wanting to get back to this natural cycle, this natural rhythm. That's for not just our reproductive health, but also our physical and mental well-being and health as well. Plays such an important role. So make sure you check out our hormone series to know a little bit more about your sex hormones, your thyroid, and also your adrenal glands and how they affect your menstrual cycle, because they all play a huge role in getting that natural rhythm. And I think the other thing to be really aware of is that unless you've got a condition or something that's affecting your cycle, it should eventually be looking this way. But hormonal contraception doesn't actually cause this, does it?
So when you're on hormonal contraception, you're not really getting these fluctuations at all. So you're not really going through these phases. But I still find that depending on what contraception you are on, women still sometimes go through somewhat of a cycle. So it's all about tuning in and seeing how that is affecting you. And also sometimes women actually follow the moon cycle as well. Like energetically, they sort of line up with the cycles of the moon. So sometimes you may still be feeling some sort of flux of energy and moods and emotions. But it's definitely not as potent as if you weren't on contraception.
Yeah, that's fantastic to know. So yes, as we were saying before, this is the textbook menstrual cycle, which we are trying to get back to for most women in that phase of your life, so before menopause. But if your cycle currently does not look anything like this, I would highly recommend checking out our videos. And then if you're needing extra help, make sure you message Nikiita and she can help you out with your menstrual cycle to make it more balanced for your healthy and happy self. So I'll see you guys in our next videos. Hope you're enjoying these series on hormonal health.